who actually raised the stink about the Taliban?
I don't. I mean, the guy. There was a press release. I don't remember the guy's name exactly, but it's online if you look it up. It was. But it's an official. It was an official position. It was like I don't know if it was a particular branch of the military, but I know that it was like, this is the military stance on this issue. We are banning this game. It will not be sold. And it was a press release.
I think it's because during the time it's like it's offensive because like you know the kids and the wives whose soldiers that died from a Taliban's bullet or bomb, it's kind of offensive to them. So when they look at it, it's a constant reminder like, hey, this Taliban killed your husband or something. So I think they're not really thinking about the soldiers. They're thinking about the families whose children play these games.
And I think that's what they said. It would be interesting to talk to somebody who knew somebody who got killed in the war and ask them if, does Op4 do it for them? Does changing it to Op4 make it okay? Does it not, or do they even care?
Right.
I mean, I don't know. That would be the kind of thing that I would want to know or want to ask somebody. And obviously, not everybody would have the exact same opinion. I know that we had a few hands over here that were before. So why don't we go with you first?
So I think a lot of that, especially with the comparison to movies, has to do with public perception as to what is legitimately artistically expressible in a game and how games are perceived, especially because they're played. And the two things there is, one, there's the fact that you're playing the game, so you are taking on this role, and I think there's a lot of perception as to, since you are taking on this role and playing the game, somehow that automatically makes what you're doing be promoted by whatever role you're playing, which is a misconception I think partially adds to this. And the other is, I also feel there's a large public opinion that games are kind of like for fun and not a proper medium for artistic expression of some serious topics. And that's why people can get away with, or people can produce things like Apocalypse Now, which is parts of it are fun, but overall very much a depressing, not fun movie, or The Deer Hunter, which is really not a fun portrayal of things at all. Yeah. And there's kind of this disconnect with like what the proper place of games are supposed to be. That makes it more critical of serious issues.
I think what it is because since video games are pretty much interactive movies, it's like, oh, it's different because you're actually controlling the outcome of what's going on.
There's a difference between just seeing someone get killed and actually doing the kill yourself.
Doing the act.
Did you have something?
Yeah, it's also important to remember in situations like this, one, that especially in marketing, community perceptions don't need to be real to be acted upon. You don't actually need to have proof that people will be mad that the name is the Taliban. You just have to have the impression that people will be mad. That you can actually use, I think the fun thing about statistics of things like focus groups and surveys is that you can use them to prove the opposite point of what numbers actually support, right? And also, kind of about what you were talking about, there's a massive, like the third person effect. If you look in communications research, there's so much stuff published about it because it's so easy to prove. But the idea is that people tend to think that others are more influenced by the media than they are. So if you ask somebody, do you think you're influenced by television, they'll say no. But then they say, do you think other people are influenced by television? They'll say, oh yeah, all the time. And I think that sort of effect is what's playing into this, right? It's just like, well, I'm probably not going to be affected. I'm fine if it's the Taliban.
Do you think
Johnny, who lives down the road, has been
This is really. I just want to mention that when you say that in the book Grand Theft Childhood, where these researchers interviewed a whole bunch of young teenagers about playing Grand Theft Auto. The funny thing they found in the research is when they would ask a 13-year-old, if is it okay for you to play this game that's like an M-rated game, they were always like, yes, of course. But then they're like, do you think it would be okay for your 12-year-old brother to play it? They would be like, no, of course not. So, but it's interesting though that it's definitely, to me, it definitely rings true from what I've read and seen. Oh. I'm offended. Actually, no. I'm happy because you're playing the Taliban, right? Or the
no, he's playing special ops now.
Oh, okay. Then I'm offended.
maybe we should lobby to change the name of hand grenade to something a little less charged.
Maybe we should change
So
the name
gumdrops.
of video
How about
game to
pineapple?
something
Yeah.
that doesn't invoke, look, it's a kid's toy.
Yeah.
Interactive entertainment.
Digital murder machine. How about that?
So,
one just quick
you were going to
comment.
say something.
This probably has been rehashed. I mean, I think the difference between a video game and a movie, there is this very significant difference in the way it's approached. I don't know, maybe this is a controversial thing to say, but I mean, I play a video game to have fun, right? And when I watch a war movie, I know I'm not going to be having fun for the next 2 hours of my life. I'm gonna be
Okay, have you never
bummed
had
out.
fun watching a war movie?
I love war movies.
I don't like war movies, but well, I guess what Tropic Thunder was pretty good. No, but seriously, I come out of it with tears in my eyes, or I'm going to be
Sure.
generally sad or bummed out by the end. But if I'm playing this, I'm doing it. It's a form of entertainment that I could suck away 4 hours of my life straight.
I imagine you could be bummed out if you got killed a lot, though.
Well, that's true. It depends on how much of a noob I am.
I think that brings up a really interesting point in what is this, not like what games in general can say about like war that's like deeper, meaningful, versus entertaining. But what this game in particular is doing, because this game doesn't strike me as, everything I heard about the plot was that it wasn't very sophisticated, it's very propagandistic, it's not, it's not very challenging. But, some movies where, maybe not movies about actual real wars that are happening right now, but like there are lots of movies like Rambo, or like, there are like lots of action movies about war where killing people is like gung-ho, fun, awesome stuff.
This is
And
a
that's how it's
serious
portrayed.
drama compared to Rambo.
Right, exactly. So when you think about it that way, it's like, it doesn't, I would say that it may not be the interactivity, it may be just that we never have games that, we don't have a war game that you play it and after a few hours you're like, oh god, I'm so depressed. I don't think that it would be impossible to have a game like that at all, but I think that seems to be not the sort of game that Danger Close or whatever is choosing to make.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can have a sympathetic to the other side movie as long as it's Clint Eastwood talking about the Japanese in World War II. I think that it would be very hard to do a sympathetic to the Taliban movie now, and I think the problem with this game is that it's a conflict that's ongoing and
Yeah.
Americans are
Yeah, it's
Exactly,
made
that's
the
what I'm
problem that
saying.
it's made now.
So,
what I'm
if
saying
this were Vietnam, I don't think there'd be a big stink. But I mean, there'd be a small group, perhaps, of Vietnam veterans.
Has somebody played the Vietnam? There were a few Vietnam games in the last 10 years. It says
That was the first Battlefield game was set in Vietnam, wasn't it?
was it Battlefield 1942? I thought.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No.
They did have a
No, they have one in Vietnam era.
They made a plugin for it called Destruction.
Oh, okay.
Vietnam, then later they created a full version.
Do you lose in that game? Do you have to lose, or how does it
Well,
work?
you
It's
start
Vietnam.
it- No, it's the same thing as all Battlefield.
It's,
And also, I kind of wonder if the rhetoric of realism that the game is embodying, right? Like, we got real military people on board to help us create a real military experience that's very realistic graphics. Like, if you were fighting with an axe, yeah. If you were fighting like the Taliban when the Taliban was made up of like the Scout and the Heavy from Team Fortress 2, would it be as offensive? Like you were killed by Taliban with a baseball bat.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point.
I think it's just that the reason why they're just making a big stick of it, like he said before, it's an ongoing war right now. People are still a bit offensive about this war. So if they were to make this video game like 10 years or 20 years from now, I don't think people would be so offensive because it's more like, this is historical, this is what happened,
So, one of the things I wanted to bring up actually is, so when you mention historical, it's actually really interesting. How many people know the game 6 Days in Fallujah? Do you know what happened to it? Can you explain what happened to it?
So this was a game. It was interesting because it was the same, a similar situation to
this.
Medal of Honor because they consulted with real soldiers. I don't think they were consulting with them as like the military, but these were like veterans, And the idea was that I think it was supposed to be some sort of cover shooter, but they were really into, I mean, this game never came out. It was killed.
It was killed, yeah.
The instant it was announced that it was as what it was, because people were so offended. But their idea, I think, had been to tell the story of these real soldiers as they spent 6 days in Fallujah. That was but yeah, it's almost the instant it was announced. Konami, I think, was the publisher. They dropped it, and then I think the game is still in limbo to this day.
Yeah, no, I think it was. Yeah, it was.
There was a huge thing about that game.
Yeah, I remember it got a lot of press, and then it disappeared. Although the press about it disappearing was big. It was like, yeah, 6 Days in Fallujah canned, and then and there was, it's funny, there was actually there wasn't a lot of explanation for it. It was just kind of some CIA assassin killed their designer or something. But but it's interesting that was a big AAA game. And it was also even more specific than this. It was like a specific historical thing that happened. It was like there's a really specific piece of like modern historical, sort of almost like fact, but I mean it was a game.
Right, and they wanted to add the sort of depth that we were just talking about.
Now one of the articles I have here mentions that they did want to do stuff in 6 Days in Fallujah, like show some things. So there was a mention, at least in one of the articles I have about it, about them wanting to show some of the civilian side in the game. So like, I don't know if you could choose to be like a soldier, a journalist, or a civilian. I'm just totally imagining that because there was some contradictory information. Like one of the things I read said that they wanted to kind of show it from all angles, and then another one I read said that it was just going to be the experience of the soldiers. And I definitely, and I want to say this with the context of, I mean, I like movies like the Hurt Locker. I definitely think that, I don't think it's inherently wrong to. Oh, never mind. So why don't we? I think we're going to move on to the next thing. But thank you. Thank you, Op4.
Nice going.
Matt, I'm just curious, and you're researching for this. Did you find any games that were actually directly related to 9/11?
Oh, you know what? So here's the interesting thing. We're about to look at something that's actually not a commercial game. The reason I didn't talk about 9/11 is because there's almost no game that touches it. There's actually a bunch of like fan-made mods and like indie stuff and indie art games that actually that touches on it. And because we're talking about censorship and the rating system, I mean, I didn't want to just get into like, because if we talk about like every game in the last 10 years, even free stuff and just like stuff made by bohemian artists and stuff like that that's political, that would be a lot of stuff. So, but there was actually a game that was made with I think Unreal 1 or 2, and I don't know if anybody knows it. I don't even remember what it was called, but it was a game where you could. It's a game where you are in like this 60th floor of one of the towers, and it's on fire, and the game begins, and then suddenly like a whole bunch of people start jumping out windows, and you have to decide whether you're going to jump out the window, or you can find this secret where you find a staircase that isn't burning, and then you get down to the bottom, and then you can like watch people falling. And it didn't have a goal or anything. The only thing about it is it's a game that wanted to give you the experience of like, oh my God, I have to jump, and that was the only thing the game was about. And so when you say that, that's the only thing I can think of. I can mention, and I'm not going to talk about it a lot, but the original ending of Metal Gear Solid 2 was a game that came out.
That's my game.
So Metal Gear Solid 2 came out, it was in development in the year and a half leading up to 9/11. It came out in November. It came out like the same week that the war in Afghanistan started. It was being developed, I think it was like just going through final testing. It was like in beta when 9/11 happened. And then it came out like a month later. But what's interesting is that this is like one of the craziest games ever to involve any kind of U.S. kind of I don't know exactly if you'd call it political commentary, but it's a crazy game because the original ending of the game actually had New York being destroyed. It takes place in New York, and the original ending, if people who know the game, like there's this giant submarine that, interestingly, speaking of censorship, is a censorship machine designed by the U.S. government to censor the internet. that you discover under New York City, and then at the end of the game, it goes haywire and crashes into New York City. And in the released game, there's a cinematic that shows it going towards I think going under the Verrazano Bridge, and then the next shot, it's already in the middle of Wall Street, having crashed into Federal Hall. But if you look at the special edition of this game, there's something called the document in Metal Gear Solid 2 that let you look at the original pitch documents and a bunch of unused artwork for it. In the unused artwork, there's actually a giant 3D model that's like the aerial shot that they didn't actually use in the cinematic, which is this giant thing basically just smashed into the middle of the city, and it actually came up like coming to a halt like right at the Twin Towers. And so there's this model that you can look at in the game. This game also involved.
That's pretty tight.
I mean, it is interesting, and it's like really obvious that something was cut out of it when you play the game. And it's interesting that this game came out, I think, right after. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was going to ask, like, do you like? Because I know you fight on top of the submarine. Do you like? Is it like right there in front of the Twin Towers? You're fighting.
So the original ending of the game actually had you're actually the guy you're killing in the last boss is the President of the United States. For those of you who haven't played this game, in the original version, in the original ending cinematic didn't just involve the thing crashing into New York. It involved him. There's this whole description of like him reaching out his hand and like grabbing the American flag and like tearing it to ribbons, and then at the end, after you slice him in half, he like grabs the American flag and like wraps himself up in it, and then like blood flies out of it as he falls off and like lands on George Washington's statue.
What? That's pretty offensive.
It is just like, it is unbelievable. It is just like, oh my God. And this game apparently like, and the thing I'm trying to figure out to this day is, does this actual cinematic exist on some hard drive somewhere at Konami and like it's never been put in the game? Because it's in the original like screenplay for the game that you can read, like very vividly described. Also, they destroy the Statue of Liberty in the original version. Like it just like smashes into the Statue of Liberty, and Statue of Liberty explodes.
I think it just symbolizes something. Like
it's no, but I mean, but it's there.
Isn't in the release version the after like the president guy is killed, you actually doesn't like Raiden like cover him with the American flag?
I don't remember. No, there's no American flag. But in the original release version, he reaches up right before he falls off. Like when you cut him in the back, as he's falling, he reaches up, and it looks like he's reaching at nothing in the release version. Yeah. There was originally like an American flag that he's reaching and grabbing as he falls off. So that's an example of like, but it was because it was in development before 9/11, and it was basically this crazy kind of, arguably kind of like anti-American, almost like X-Files kind of conspiracy theory, kind of crazy anti-establishment kind of game. And it just came out like, it came out right before 9/11, so then they cut this one part out of it, but then
released it. Because everybody's all patriotic.
And the bad guys in the game are called the Patriots. No, but it's, in terms of censored for 9/11, that's actually, and it's ironic because the game's actually about censorship. Mm-hmm. So it's actually one of the examples of a 9/11, specific examples of 9/11 in a commercial game, of like the Twin Towers, for example, being taken out. I mean, one of the other obvious ones is Microsoft Flight Simulator, which took out the Twin Towers in the Microsoft Flight Simulator that was released like a few months after. Or no, I think it was already out, and did they release a patch? I don't remember. Did they patch it? But you didn't have to download the patch though, right? Like, I'm offended that you have not patched this content out of the game.
That's why the intentional bugs were
No,
there.
that's right. Yeah, they put a bunch of bugs in the game. But yeah, I'm sorry. Something. Oh, okay. So no, I mean the 9/11 thing is actually really interesting. The one of the things I wanted to bring up too is, and again, I wanted to say this with the to say that I'm not against showing things from a soldier's perspective, but I do think that when we talk about things like politics, often when game makers say, like for example, people who did 6 Days in Fallujah who were working on it, we're saying like our game isn't political, our game doesn't have a political perspective, but we're only showing everything from this one side or from the sides of these particular people, which definitely to me feels like a political perspective, just because you're privileging one side. And one of the things I wanted to show.
Well, I mean, one thing I find I mean, it's not like that isn't the only time that something has been based off a real thing. I mean, there was that Brothers in Arms game that came out 1 or 2 years ago that was based directly off of the failed Operation Market Garden.
Sure.
I mean, but it.
Well, what do you mean based on a real thing?
I forget the exact name of it. It was one of the Brothers in Arms games, but it was actually based off of the disastrous Operation Market Garden, which involved in which U.S. forces found themselves behind enemy lines, hopelessly outnumbered.
There are a huge number of games which are about Market Garden.
But they're about a long time ago too. Is
Yeah.
the silly point.
I mean, and that's how, do you think 6 Days in Fallujah could actually be made if this was like 30 years later?
Well, probably.
Probably.
I mean, anything could be made given enough time, right?
True.
That's what I was saying before. It's like right now it's a wound that we have, you know, and you know it's kind of like you don't want to make it worse by. People would kind of think it's insensitive, you know what I mean? So it's like we gotta like wait 20 years to make the game.
Yeah. Well, like for example, that usually happens. Like usually. In the case of movies that are really about a current conflict are presented as if they were about a previous conflict. Like MASH, the movie before the TV show, was made during the Vietnam War. It's about the Korean War. It's not about the Korean War. It's like obviously about the Vietnam War, right? So, I mean, so that happens a lot in film usually. Although there have been a surprising amount of movies that actually have been about the Afghanistan and Iraq wars actually released, you know, during the time. However. One of the points I want to make though is that you know, and again, a lot of the ones that have been released in America are ones, you know, from an American perspective, which is, you know, I mean, it's to be expected. But there have been other films and have been, in this case, actually some games or interactive art that have been made about the experiences of other people. Like this is actually a game that was made by an Iraqi, who is and I don't know if I can't remember which university it is. I know it's in Denmark, but it's basically it's called First Person Victim, and it's something that he made that was about, and this is the trailer for it.
Yikes.
So I mean, so obviously this isn't a commercial game, but obviously the title is you know, inviting a comparison with commercial games, because it's in this. It's sort of like an inversion of this genre of first-person shooter, of course.
So you're like the civilian.
You're the civilian, and then basically it's about the game it kind of gives you a scenario that's almost like the beginning of like a Half-Life or something, because you know it's kind of like everything's fine, and all of a sudden, oh no, there's bombs. You have to like find a gun and then, you know, run around. And this game almost starts like that, but then the joke is that, I mean, is that you actually can't do anything. Like the game's really about nothing except running around and like trying to save people, but then watching them die, and at the end, like just, I don't even think there's a way to survive it. At the end, it's a game just about feeling powerless and running through this horrible situation. And you know, and obviously there's different sides, you know, in a conflict. And I think the thing I just wanted to draw attention to is that, you know, it's interesting that, you know, when we talk about politics in games, just the being within a certain perspective and is itself a kind of, I guess what I'm saying is that and you can disagree with me, that's fine. I guess I believe there's no such thing as a neutral political position, right? That just by being a game that's made in the United States, that has all this money behind it and has the cooperation of the U.S. military, even though it's somber, even though it's, you know, not trying to be really offensive in terms of saying, yeah, it's fun to kill civilians. That's not what those games are saying. You still are in a particular kind of political worldview. And there aren't a lot of games that actually get you out of that kind of a political worldview. And certainly no commercial games, certainly no AAA games. But I mean, that's my take on it, and that's why I wanted to show it. But I mean, I saw some hands up. I don't know if anybody had any comments or questions about this in particular. This is a video, as far as I know. I mean, actually, we were at a conference where the people who made this game were there and showed it, and I think some people played it, but I didn't actually play it myself. I only talked to them afterwards.
I mean, it seemed incredibly powerful, and that's the sort of thing that we were talking about, serious games, you know, comparing it to serious war movies. Like, that's a great example.
You're saying that makes you feel what those war movies make you feel.
Right, exactly. You know, it's a serious portrayal, and I guess I don't have a thesis statement about this talk, which has been very interesting, but you know, I think reverence and irreverence to core values of a society are kind of the video game. It creates an environment where people could be very irreverent to sensitive subjects, and I think that's maybe part of the issue. A movie is very controlled. This is, you know, it's telling a story, and it's not. It seems like it's not opening that much opportunity to be completely irreverent to whatever.
I don't know. It'd be interesting to think of what an irreverent play of this game would be. Would it be just hopping up and down and
right, yeah,
refusing to, you know, acting silly, you know, amidst the chaos? Like, would that be refusing the message? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting to me, and I think that what I don't know how directly this follows, but one of the things I wanted to bring up before we're done is this whole idea of how real is it exactly, or just kind of like what are the kind of narratives that these games put you in, just by kind of being a soldier to begin with. But I also just wanted to bring up too, and your point was really interesting when you were talking about how, you know, people who are actual servicemen, you know, it's like, you know, it's not real, and I feel like the not realness of it and the realness of it being a selling point is really interesting to look at across cultures, because, you know, the assumption also is that these games are being made sort of by Americans for Americans, although actually a lot of people make them aren't American. I mean, it's interesting that a lot of the Tom Clancy games, which is a very, you know, kind of like macho American kind of brand, it's like a lot of those games, like all the Splinter Cell games are Canadian.
Really?
So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and one of them was made in China.
Yeah, Ubisoft Shanghai and Montreal.
Ubisoft Shanghai, Ubisoft Montreal are the companies that made all those games.
Isn't Ubi based in Montreal?
Originally they're based in France.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of French-Canada connection going on there. But yeah, no, they're all over the world. Although I don't even know if do they even have any branches in the U.S.? I
think they might have one in like North Carolina for the Rainbow Six franchise.
But it's what's interesting too is that I wanted to just show this commercial too. So this is there's a great website called Video Game Ads, and they show where you can look at the commercial for the same game in different countries. And this is I wanted to show the Japanese commercial for SOCOM U.S. Navy SEALs. If it'll run.
I didn't know they actually play this game over there in Japan. That's awesome.
Sign me up.
That game would be way more awesome.
Yeah.
So
Super
I
Soaker.
feel like they must have been copying that from the Call of Duty commercial.
Right.
So yeah, and this is like I think this is actually like the SOCOM 2 commercial, but it's basically the same game. But this is a US commercial for the same experience.
I'm liking this Censoring?
Are guns not allowed in like visible media of any kind?
No, no, you can have guns. You can have guns on television and media. And you can.
That's it.
This is like way more.
U.S. Navy SEALs.
Well, one of the things that I'm interested in is the idea of is the selling point the fact that it's real, or is the selling point the fact that it's imaginary? Because you see the opposite view in each of those cases. Like in the case of the Japanese commercial, it's like you should do this because it's pretend, and pretending is fun. Seems to be the whole thing. And then the other one is definitely, and I'm not saying that necessarily means all American players engage with it that way. I mean, I think a lot of people engage with it as pretend, and most people do, right? But the commercial is definitely sort of like, look at how real this is. This is going to make you feel like a real, awesome, badass kind of macho soldier. And it says a lot about the kind of fantasy life of, at least of the marketing. And it's interesting. I wonder if how accurate that is, reflecting those cultures, because again, talking about the maybe the higher ups in the military, the old guard in the military have or maybe even the marketing people, whoever is making these decisions at the high level, have a strong view of, this is real. People think this is real, and maybe it's the same, people in the government or the in the Congress who are like, people think this is real. That's why we have to censor it or whatever, right, for violence. But then you have the players who are like, well, we understand completely that this is actually not real.